I love tabletop role-playing games. I love them so much. Just sitting around playing pretend with your friends, but you're not in a sandbox, you're in a Discord call where one of your friends' microphones keeps refusing to pick up the first and last word of her sentences. Just all these really fun storytelling games with a set of rules to help the story go forward and making the game more interesting. And I'm what you call a forever DM, or Dungeon Master, or Game Master, or GM, which means I'm never the one going on said adventures. Instead, I'm the one writing out the world, controlling all the people that they come across, and attempting to make the act of them being here fun and engaging while agonizing all week waiting for the session to happen. And I love it. I love being a forever game master. I love writing and seeing where the story surprises all of us and finding neat ways for my friends' characters to become integrated into the overarching plot of what we're doing and working together with them when it comes to telling the stories of their OCs. I love it, I love it, I love it! And this means that I'm running a lot of Dungeons & Dragons. It's a game that's kind of synonymous with the whole medium. When people ask me what I mean when I say tabletop RPGs, I usually just say, oh, it's like D&D, and they'll instantly get it. But there's a whole world out there of tabletop RPGs that aren't Dungeons & Dragons, and don't get me wrong, I love D&D 5th edition. It's the first tabletop RPG I've ever played, but there's so much more out there that I want to play. It's an entire industry full of interesting games of many different genres, and I know that you can play D&D in those non-typical fantasy genres, but there's so many games that can facilitate those things in other unique and interesting ways, and I want to give you an overview of those games and tell you why they're so gosh damn fun. And I guess I'll be starting with the polar opposite of Tolkien-esque tales of saving the Forgotten Realms, and that's with one of my favorite RPGs that was literally conceived when its creator wanted to see if she could play Twilight through this medium. So this is Monsterhearts 2, or Monsterhearts 2nd Edition, but mostly just Monsterhearts 2, a game made by Avery Alder and published by Buried Without Ceremony, the coolest name for a publisher ever. I can't use MCR. What's something that's depressing but motivating, like upbeat yet sad? Yeah, this works. Monsterhearts 2 is set in the paranormal romance genre, which is usually centered around high schoolers who discover that monsters are real and promptly fall in love with said monsters. The core conceit of Monsterhearts is that you all play as teenage monsters, dealing with various themes like love, social situations, and a strange darkness on the edge of town that is ever encroaching, ready to take away the thing that you love most. Normal teen stuff. On how to actually play the game, if you're nervous since D&D is already a lot to learn, don't worry, it's a far simpler system than D&D 5e. It uses the framework of another game called Apocalypse World to make it narrative first, so the mechanics are there to add to the story. First up, you don't roll a d20. I know, parting is such sweet sorrow. You always roll 2d6s, and if you're not a loser like me, you call them 2 regular-ass dice. You add the 2 that you roll together, add a stat modifier, and see the result. A 1 to 6 means you failed, and bad things will now happen because of it. But you do get a mark of experience, and get 5 of those, and you get one of the advancements that are on your character sheet. A 7 to 9 is a partial success, which means you could do what you want to, but not as effective, or you do it exactly as you wanted, but with a consequence that can come anywhere down the line. And a 10 or above means you did it! Congrats! You get to feel cool for a few seconds as you describe how you succeed. Also, while your stats in D&D are kind of there to simulate reality with stuff like strength and wisdom, your stats in Monsterhearts 2 are based on the mood that the genre invokes. So, in this game you have 4 stats that you add or subtract to your dice rolls. They are hot, cold, volatile, and dark. You also roll based on the situations that your GM calls for, and the Game Master or GM in this game is called the MC, or Master of Ceremonies, and I'm probably going to be using all these interchangeably, so sorry about that. So, say that you want to slash at someone with that Sumerian engraved knife that you were found with when you woke up with amnesia one day. Your MC realizes that you're doing a move called Lash Out Physically, which covers most of the ways that you physically want to harm someone. That move uses the volatile stat to roll, and if you get a mixed success, your MC will give you a choice on what kind of mixed success this is. Like, maybe that werewolf hunter you attacked on the full moon finds a backpack that you left behind, and now they know what school you go to. Or maybe you punch someone who's threatening to reveal to a community of witchfinders that you yourself are a witch, but you don't realize in your moment of anger that you're on a staircase, and now you've got a murder on your hands. Sorry. So thus in Monsterhearts, you don't say, I'm gonna try and climb this fence, and since volatile is my physical strength, that means I'll roll volatile. Rolling isn't like that for every single thing you do. Advice for this and Dungeons & Dragons is that you'll only roll if there's a way of failing. So if you're just climbing a 5-foot tall wooden fence, you and your MC can decide, well, my character's on the field and track team, so this'll be easy, and you do it. But if you're trying to climb, say, a 10-foot tall fence of barbed wire while being chased by all those undead monstrosities that were accidentally set loose, you still won't roll volatile. You and your MC realize that this is much more about trying to keep your cool under pressure, and you're gonna roll the Keep Your Cool move, which uses the cold stat instead. So if you can attack others, is there a way for you to be attacked? Well, you only take harm if you fail a roll, like getting a mixed success on the previous example where you successfully climb the fence, but the undead keep shaking it until you fall on the other side, seriously injuring you. The MC never actually rolls dice in this game, and as someone who spent far too much money on those tasty looking polyhedrons, I know how painful that might be to hear. It all stems from the fiction, which the MC has first say on, but the players and their dice rolls have final say on. And on the note of taking harm, you don't have a lot of HP. You're playing as Sabrina and pals, not the Fellowship of the Ring. You have 4 empty spaces on your character sheet to mark harm, and when you take just 1, that's really bad. The game recommends only healing 1 slot per session. It's not there to know how much damage a cantrip does, it's there for the drama of your character swerving their car at midnight to avoid a vampire serial killer, who's standing in the middle of the road to intimidate you, and you fail your keep your cool roll, taking 3 harm as you crash on the side of the road into a tree. A whole 3 harm. Guess next session's taking place in a hospital. But the game's story isn't just defined by the failures and successes of stat-based rolls. There are 4 other important systems in this game: strings, conditions, the darkest self, and sex moves. Now, obviously, sex is a touchy topic, especially when the game is meant to be set in high school, and there are a few solutions to this that a lot of people implement. Number 1, fade to black when it's confirmed that sex is about to happen. Cut to the next scene like it's a show that's not a Netflix or HBO original. Sex moves are things that happen because 2 characters have had sex, not detailed mechanics on what goes where. Solution number 2. The setting doesn't have to be high school. At the core of this game is modern-day monsters and a location where you regularly interact with the same assortment of people on a daily basis. This could also be college or a cafe you all work at, with the rest of the school being replaced with the other local businesses. And solution 3, which people pair with 1 and 2. It doesn't have to be sex. There are actually rules in this game that talk about if you're playing an asexual character when it comes to sex moves, which is really cool. But also what I mean is, initiate a sex move when 2 characters have an extremely intimate moment that you both consider strong enough to initiate it. This could be physical, but it could also be emotional. I mean, one of the character playbooks in this game only mentions 2 characters lying naked in their sex move without mentioning anything else. As for what these sex moves are, I'm going to talk about them in a second, but first I want to talk about the strings, conditions, and the darkest self. Conditions aren't technically mechanical when it comes to gameplay. They're labels that are imposed on your character, and it's how your peers are currently seeing you, like loser, or bully, or lost. This doesn't sound like a lot, but as this game is envisioned with characters who are in high school, being a teenager is when those labels really do affect you, and can manifest how they affect you in various ways you discover via roleplay. Strings are like a social currency. If you have a string on someone, that means essentially that they owe you a favor, or they're under your social influence. You spend this string by calling in said favor, or influencing them in a very strong way to push their opinion one way or another. After it's spent, you lose that string on a person, but you can always get another one, and they stack, so you can have multiple strings on a single character. Plus, when creating characters, you and your group discuss who begins the game with strings on who, be it other players or NPCs. And finally, like all good teen fiction, the darkest self is allegorical for the struggles that teens go through, made manifest via urban fantasy tropes. It's an extreme emotional state that influences how you roleplay your character, and can only be escaped by certain actions that are judged by the type of character that you're playing. Your darkest self happens when you either fail or get a mixed success on certain moves, or when you all think it's a moment where the story calls for it. It doesn't actually affect your stats in the game, but the roleplay, which is really fascinating if you ask me, since the game is calling on you to further the narrative and character arcs through its mechanics. But now we get to talk about my favorite part of the game. What playbooks are there to choose from? In Monsterhearts 2, your character classes are called skins, and each one functions very differently from the other. I'm mostly going over these just to kind of get the imagination going on what kind of characters you can make, since I just love doing that when it comes to tabletop RPGs. These aren't going to be comprehensive tutorials, but on the creator's website, all of these are free to look at with all their character sheets and everything. So yeah, links below. But for now, we're going to start with one that I was actually going to save for the middle of all this, since I thought that this was the darkest skin in the game, but while I was rereading them, I realized that one is actually way darker than this one, so this one can start us out as a pseudo-edgy darkness. Let's talk about the ghoul. Did I say that too aggressively? I promise I won't say the other ones like I'm a Scooby-Doo villain. The Ghoul is a playbook all about hunger, but unlike the ones that we see on Monster of the Week shows, this ghoul isn't necessarily having a hunger for humans. Instead, you have a choice between more ephemeral types of hunger, from a list including fear, power, plunder, or thrills. And you can flavor those however you want. Plunder could be forbidden knowledge or secrets, and power could be souls, you get it. But be warned, because your darkest self does turn you into that corpse-eating ghoul that we're all so familiar with from that one episode of Supernatural. Yeah, I watched it. I was a high schooler, okay? Don't worry, you don't have to give in to the hunger in order to escape your darkest self. Though you could. Instead, you can wait out a period that you all deem long enough for it to wear off. which may involve your friends chaining you in a bunker that they usually reserve for their werewolf friend. God forbid you go darkest self on the full moon and you get to see who kills who first. Your moves are some of my favorite in the game, like telling someone how you died and became this way, which actually adds to your turn them on move, or one called Watchful Golem, where you get a point of experience if you help someone without them ever knowing. A silent protector, a watchful guardian, a dark... And your sex move is adding a new thing to your list of hungers, so careful with that. Also, one of your moves is never being able to permanently die, which just gives the MC an excuse to throw more deadly crap at you like Simon from Misfits. On the subject of bad topic transitions, let's talk about the Fae. The Fae is all about those strings that people have. You make binding promises with people, and if they break it, then you get a string on them. You can spend that string as social pull like normal, but you can also use it as a form of luck magic on them, causing them to get hurt when they mess something up, or getting a little bonus on your roll where you try and get revenge on them for crossing you. Along with this, you can also do things like escort people you have power over to the Seelie and Unseelie realms, or get the King of the Fae to reveal secrets to you, with a quid pro quo, of course. As the Fae know, promises always go two ways. Their sex move is lying naked with someone, though again, you can reflavor that if you think the moment is intimate enough, and asking them for a promise, and if they refuse, you get a whole 2 strings on that person. So it's a win for you either way, really. Meanwhile, your darkest self is all about seeing an imbalance in all things, which in a way those promises kind of represent. You escape your darkest self when you see that balance restored, though you and your MC might have some fun determining just what exactly that means. Now for the Bella Swan of the bunch, the Mortal. Oh, and this is the one I consider the darkest, so heads up, content warning for abusive relationships. Now this game is all about embracing that part of you that unironically loves flavory gothic prose and making your old OC manifest, but especially the Mortal. As the Mortal, you get a lover, capital L, and this can be an NPC or a fellow player. You can have more than one romantic interest, but you can only have one capital L lover, since that represents just the person who's at the center of your universe right now. You get a +1 when it comes to roles that involve helping out or impressing your lover, but your moves and abilities, while helping you when it comes to those things, enforce the potential horribleness that is your relationship with them. Hence why I consider this the darkest skin in the game. Like, it has one move that makes it so if you forgive someone for hurting you, you get a string on them, something that you can play as either naive or outright manipulative on your part. Not to mention, if you ignore someone that you have sex with, they become their darkest self. As for the Mortal's darkest self, it's all about them lashing out at everybody for nobody understanding them, and the only way to escape it is when they see that their lover has been harmed by their current state. This can be played as either sweet with the lover being honest with the Mortal, or downright awful, like say your Mortal having a current villain as their lover, and said lover/villain purposely keeping them in this harmful state. It is the most toxic reading of Bella Swan's behavior in Twilight, and should be played with care if you're making one of your fellow players your lover, or just in general, to be honest. But onto our next playbook, The Witch is what happens when the algorithm that runs all of our lives realizes that you've been watching a lot of BookTube and a lot of the Witch's tag on TikTok, and it decides to bring you into the cross-pollination of them. As the Witch, you're given access to hexes. You can acquire sympathetic tokens from people, like strands of hair, personal belongings, etc. which you spend to do very powerful spells on the person that you got the token from. Don't worry, this isn't the wizard spell list in Pathfinder, as there's only 5 to choose from, but what a 5 they are. One makes it so you can sense through that person's eyes and ears, one makes their hair and teeth fall out, and one makes it so they can never bring harm to anything ever again. Which can lead to a very cool moment at the end of an arc where the big bad realizes that they can never actually use that scythe belonging to a slain Grim Reaper that they've been after the entire story arc. But be warned, because like Willow from Buffy, your darkest self is expending all of those spells on any who dare stand in your way. How dare they think they can call themselves worthy to even stand on the same path as one as powerful as you? And also like Willow from Buffy, you escape your darkest self when you make peace with the one that you've hurt the most. Or second most in Willow's case, since I think the other guy had just a tad more of a bad time than Xander. He deserved it though. And their sex move, you get a sympathetic token from the other person, duh. I love how in their playbook it says, they know about it, it's cool, just so it doesn't paint the witch as someone going around having sex solely to raid the person's trash can while they're asleep. Okay, who here agrees that the Warlock is the best D&D class when it comes to narrative? Because for all of you people, who are my kin, we have the Infernal. Like its Faustian brethren of other genres, the Infernal is someone who's made a deal with a corrupting entity known as a Dark Power. The specifics on the Dark Power are very much up to interpretation deliberately, and can be anything you want. It could be a demon, but it could also be an eldritch god, a decaying witch in the woods, or the town's mayor who's slowly been selling real estate to the Umbral Parliament until the whole town is unwillingly whisked away to the realm of midnight trolls. Anything goes, really. When it comes to allegory, the Infernal is rife with it, specifically when it comes to addiction and the reliance on someone toxic, with moves like Numbing It Out, where you can remove harm and conditions from yourself by giving a string to your Dark Power, or Dark Recruiter, where you get experience by getting someone new to enter a pact with whatever holds power over you. It's a character that can feel a lot like they're from Skins, which I love. The TV show, not the terminology for character playbooks that I've been using. But it's not just the dark power that can be manipulative. I mean, sure, the Infernal's darkest self is feeling a shivering need to please that dark power and can only escape it when you either satisfy the dark power or make a pact with an even more dangerous and powerful entity. But the Infernal can play the Pretty Little Liars game themselves too, in the most manipulative way possible in favor of said dark power, to be fair. Since your sex move is the extremely sketch ability to have your dark power lose a string on you and then gain a string on whoever you initiated the move with. We've all got baggage. Sometimes that baggage just happens to be Yog-Sothoth, that born of the Nameless Mist. But onto my first playbook, the Hollow. The Hollow is something made from nothing. Kind of like a Frankenstein's monster, and since the monster is Dr. Frankenstein's son, it is technically okay to call it Frankenstein, especially since Dr. Frankenstein never even finished med school. What was I saying? The Hollow is essentially just something created without a true past. It could be a creepy human-sized glass doll brought to life, or a person forcibly pulled out of a painting with no way of getting back into their old world. The world's first artificially made soul put into the body of someone in a coma. Or if you really want to give your GM a present, just an amnesiac whose past even you don't know. Game masters love when they get to play around with stuff like that, or at least I do. The Hollow's moves are all about self-discovery, like being able to temporarily take a move from the playbook of another one of your fellow players, or getting experience simply by taking on a condition. Your darkest self is all about the feeling of unbelonging that comes with this skin, only being able to escape it when you see how someone else feels more trapped than you do. As for the sex move, both you and the person controlling whoever you had sex with writes down if it was soothing or confusing for them, and you reveal it at the same time. If you both write down the same answer, then you get experience, hooray! Now the Hollow's probably the most, nothing feeling skin, both because of its literal concept and its mechanics kinda being bare bones. Their moves don't really move the story forward the way the other playbooks do, and it is pretty crappy how the only way to escape your darkest self can easily be interpreted as going, it's not actually that bad for you. But there is something freeing about how creative you can get with the skin's concept of made from nothing. Plus it appeals to the part of me that unironically loves Kingdom Hearts, okay? We're moving on and nobody's going to ask me questions about that. Spooky time! Time for the ghost. The ghost is obviously someone who's died, but most people don't realize that they're a ghost since they can still go to school and they look mostly normal. But they're still, a ghost, which has the downside of, being dead, and not even a cool type of dead like the vampire or the ghoul, just straight up one step away from oblivion dead. The ghost gets moves all about their interaction with others on account of how they're not fully here anymore, stuck on this earthly plane by a particularly traumatizing death that you and your MC get to decide on, or just your MC if you decide that you don't remember how you died. Moves like taking on the harm of another when you just sit and listen to them, or getting strings on people when you help them out instead of the usual way via manipulation. The only thing I don't like about their moves is that their move Limitless, which lets them walk through walls and fly, doesn't have the word disappear in it, so I can't sing it along to the Danny Phantom theme song. You get the fun and extremely traumatizing darkest self of being unseen and unheard by pretty much everything, only able to communicate via typical ghost tropes such as writing on the wall and knocking over objects. And you escape it with the extremely touching moment where someone both acknowledges your presence and demonstrates that they want you around. As for their sex move, it makes it so you can ask a question of whoever you did the deed with, but they can also ask one of you, and you both have to answer honestly, which is honestly just a cooler version of the Hollow sex move. But moving on to the Queen, who kind of represents the generic popular kid, where, like the Hollow, you can interpret that however you want. It could be that you're an alpha mean girl, but it could also be that you're a thought vampire, an Eldritch hive mind, or a second-generation Antichrist with a legion of fallen angels obeying your every command. Their mechanics mostly revolve around their clique, being a group of people that gives them moves like subtracting 1 from any rolls made against you so long as they're by your side. Or, if you want, being able to psychically communicate with them. As advancements, almost all of the skins in the game have the ability to eventually join a larger group, like the witch becoming a part of a coven, or the ghost finding an already haunted house to live in. But the Queen is the only one who gets one of those right away. And this even extends to their sex move, wherein anyone who you use it with is temporarily considered a part of your clique. Your darkest self is about lashing out at those who have failed you, but one cool thing is how you escape it either by destroying someone innocent or relinquishing your power to someone more deserving, causing a moment of introspection for the character. Conceptually, this is probably my least favorite skin, not because of the trope it's invoking. I mean, God knows that Cordelia is my favorite Buffy character, tied with Anya, and she's definitely my favorite character on Angel. But just from the standpoint of this character being the only one who sort of has a presupposed personality attached to it, sure, you can flavor it however you want. I made the one I drew of a charismatic jock, but there's nothing stopping you from making any of the other skins a popular kid, so it feels kind of out of place how much this skin requires a social standing. Again though, flavor it however you want, and I do love how its darkest self can force some hardcore character development when done right. On to the real meat of the bunch, the werewolf can definitely take a punch. We all know the tropes, and I'll start with the darkest self because it's not just the full moon that transforms you, your darkest self does as well. As when the werewolf goes darkest self, you outright become that insert your personal description of a terrifying mythical wolf beast here. You can escape that ravenous form by waiting until sunrise, though that might be a while if you get severely pissed off at 9 a.m. But you can also escape it by accidentally hurting someone that you care about. Even the simplest concepts in this game lead to the ultimate drama, I love it. The werewolf is the most physical skin in this game, and you get moves like getting experience whenever you become your darkest self as an almost motivator to become it. And one particularly romantic move, where if you're basked in moonlight, you get a +3 to your dark stat. Plus the even more romantic sex move of making it so you get a +1 to your rolls when it comes to defending the last person you had sex with. That is until one of you breaks the intense connection between you two. I love how intense this playbook can be, and it's a nice contrast to the other skins by being so physical. Perfect for the big moments toward the end of a story arc. And who doesn't love a good moment where, to prove the power of a new big bad, the werewolf who's been the powerhouse this whole time gets the crap kicked out of them? To finish things off is the other member of the Halloween Classics duo, the vampire. Because, to quote a friend of mine who was quoting a Tumblr post that I for the life of me cannot find, you should begin Twilight on Team Jacob, but you should end it on Team Edward. Like the mortal, the vampire is all about manipulation, but from the other end, wherein you're the one controlling people like chess pieces. Your moves include your usual gambit of vampire powers, like an entrancing thrall, or getting a string on someone if they invite you into their home. Which is honestly fine, since if you're playing as a vampire, why not go all in on the tropiness? Their darkest self is being even more manipulative than usual, and you can only escape it by someone literally putting you in your place. Thankfully, their sex move doesn't entail nearly as much manipulation as they usually have, since all it is gaining a string on someone if you reject their advances, or losing all strings on someone if you do have sex with them, meaning the vampire is kind of motivated to avoid it. But it's also symbolic of letting themselves finally trust someone by giving up any control they might have had on them. It's sweet. That's all the core skins, but what kind of stories are you supposed to tell if you're the game master? Hopefully the examples that I've given throughout this will strike your fancy, but remember, while inter-character drama is the core of the game, it doesn't have to be just that, like how the core of Dungeons & Dragons is dungeons, but most people don't just play that. In fact, most people I know don't even go into dungeons or fight dragons in D&D. Twilight dabbles in vampire politics, True Blood is an outright series of murder mysteries, you can do anything in this genre. Also, I've mentioned the idea of big bads a few times throughout here, as there are plenty of villains that can take center stage without detracting from the core of the game. This could be the class president, or the evil school principal and their cult of teachers, or outside forces from beyond. I should also actually say that there's an optional playbook called The Chosen, optional because it's free on the creator's website, and I'm not going to get into it as it's not part of the core game, since it shifts the focus of the game to something more Monster of the Week-ish, making the show less Vampire Diaries and more Teen Wolf. It's always cool to have a big bad, a lot of paranormal romances have them, but the big bad should only be one element of what the players are up to tackling. A lot of paranormal romances have the overarching plots being taking on a major threat, but the weekly stories are usually about smaller things, like dealing with the recent murders that are being blamed on the werewolf because they've all happened on the full moon, or the drama of who's going to be cast as the lead in the school musical, or all of the player characters getting arrested because the sheriff has realized that they're all involved with the local hauntings, and now they're all freaking out not just because it means they have nowhere to run when the flayed lurker shows up, but because now they're all going to be late for prom! I've had a blast coming up with stories for this game, like a dark moment of time made sentient and taking away people who are at their lowest points, or a class-wide scavenger hunt that ends up taking the characters deeper into a conspiracy about their town's dark past. Plus, there are other neat things in the book that motivate fun scenarios. My personal favorite is under the Seasons and Season Advances section of the book, which talks about story arcs and how everyone can make a huge change to their character when the season comes to an end, such as outright switching your character skin, like the mortal dying and being brought back as a ghoul, or the witch learning that their innate magical ability comes from them being a changeling who was swapped at birth, and now they're coming to terms with being a fae. Like all good games, talk with your players about where you want their character stories to go. Oh god, I'm always so bad at final paragraphs. Look, Monsterhearts 2 is a really fun game that should definitely be played with the knowledge of what you're getting into, because it does go into some dark topics. The game comes with advice on elements like the X card and other ways of handling sensitive topics, and if you don't know what that means, I'll link to some really good articles below on what that is. And like I said earlier, one of the best parts is that all of the skins in the game are a free PDF on the creator's website, along with basic stuff for the MC, so you could technically start playing right away for free. Plus, if you use Roll20, there are built-in character sheets for Monsterhearts 2 to help you out. Links to all this below, and you can also get the full PDF of the game on the creator's website. It's such a different type of RPG, and if you're like me and you've been playing D&D non-stop for the past 4 years, I think it's okay to let yourself explore the world of RPGs. especially if your starting point is your vampiric coffee shop AU.